Jedd Fisch is on a mission, and he wants to be a maniacal recruiter during his time at Washington.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. He writes for Inside the Huskies of Fan Nation Sports Illustrated. I'm the news site editor over with Huskies Wire. Make sure you check out all of our written work at our respective sites. But thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. That's why LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster and for free. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnCollege. Terms and conditions apply. Lars, you and I are just getting back from Jedd Fisch's introductory press conference, and we were both really impressed by what he had to say. And one of the first things that really stood out to both of us was when Troy Dannen, the athletic director, was introducing him. The very first thing he said was, what we needed first was a maniacal recruiter. And I feel like a lot of Husky fans who want to see where this program can go in terms of recruiting with, the modern age of NIL, with high school recruiting, with so many other things, were really happy by that statement. And I think both you and I were really impressed by not only the statement itself, but how Jedd Fisch followed that up with subsequent comments.
Yeah, and I think that was kind of the thing where in the last regime, that's the one thing Kalen DeBoer wasn't necessarily known for, right? Was his person, like known as like a good person, a nice person, right? Like once you get to meet him, sort of thing. But Jedd Fisch is a guy who comes in with name cachet and not a humble personality, but he is humble, right? Like and that thing, to your point, that's what kind of struck me about his press conferences. He knows he needs people around him in Seattle to succeed. This isn't Jedd Fisch saying, "Hey, I'm coming, I'm bringing my offense, I'm bringing my program, my system, my guys." Because if you just read the press clippings and, oh, wow, he's bringing basically his whole coaching staff from Arizona, or at least, majority, certainly of the offensive staff, you would think, okay, wow, Washington just bought Arizona's football program. Well, that's not necessarily the case, right? Because you can bring the people, and that's one thing Jedd also talked about was we want to build on the culture, right? It's about people. It's about who you surround yourself with. It's about, because Jedd could have a great game plan, but if his coaches can't teach his players to execute that throughout the week and leading up to the game and then making those in-game adjustments, all of Jedd Fisch's positives go right out the window. So having that ability to be a true people person, somebody who values relationships, but also who's going to be that grinder, right? I do think kind of DeBoer got a little bit of a bad rap because we do know he was making those late night calls. It wasn't like he was out of the office at 5 p.m. or anything like that. But there's just kind of a different dynamic in that personality, right? And I will say from what I've seen in comments, not just from Arizona people, but just kind of from across the country, across the college football landscape, Jedd Fisch wasn't exactly not enthused, but he was kind of like almost measured, right? Where it's like, hey, I could be this rah, like, yeah, I'm excited, this is awesome. Or I could be like, hey, like, I know what just happened a week ago. I know where you guys were. Like, this team is pretty good. This program has a lot of potential. So I'm not coming in here to reinvent the wheel. I am just coming in here to kind of build on what's already here and try and make it even better. And I think that exactly is the type of personality that Jedd Fisch brings. And that's how he becomes a maniacal, dynamic recruiter, is he knows the players to get. Go look at who Arizona is already in the top 5 or top 7 of, and some of the top 5 quarterbacks on the West Coast in 2025. So he's doing that at Arizona. Now imagine doing that at Washington, where now recruits have seen over the past couple of years, hey, Washington's actually an offensive school. Like, not just for the great Buda Baker defense, Taylor Rapp, and all that he also mentioned at the press conference. And so that's another thing where he understands the history, the recent and long-term history of this program, right? He knows what Kalen DeBoer did here. He's not trying to brush that aside, like, yeah, I won't leave you guys like the last coach. Like, no, he took the measured shots that he did, but he didn't misspeak. And I think that was the important thing, because you can be a great person and have a great personality, but if your words get you in trouble, that's where it can come back to haunt you. And Jedd didn't say anything today that would hurt him down the line.
So I agree with you there. And I think on top of that, one of the biggest things that both you and I noticed when we did a breakout media session after the introductory press conference, that you asked him about in-state recruiting, where he had a nice comment about circling the wagons and making sure that you highlighted that, which is something I know you and I both get asked about a lot. But he also talked about how he has a lot of work to do already. And he said, yeah, I was ready to get back out on the road tomorrow to recruit, but I know that I need to start here with this program, because you and I talked about him a lot on the last show. And then, right after we pressed stop recording, Parker Brailsford decided to enter his name in the transfer portal. And I think we need to stress that that does not mean he is going to transfer. That just means he is opening the door to look at other programs. And you can say the same thing about Jeremy Bernard, Austin Mack, Will Rogers, a whole bunch of other guys who have done so. And now it's a matter of re-recruiting them, because he said, yeah, we have 63, 65, something like that, scholarship players on the roster right now, between guys that transferred and guys that are leaving for the draft. That's a lot of work that I have to do. And he emphasized that it starts with the roster right now. So I thought that was really nice that he was, I'm going to make sure that I take a lot of time to talk to these guys right now and try my best to make sure that I get them to come back here to Washington. Whereas you can't fault anybody for, after the way the last week or so has played out, that they want to do that. They want to look around a little bit. We've already seen Dyson McCutcheon, the cornerback, decide to take his name out of the transfer portal and stay with Washington. So it's very possible that some of these guys are going to return, and we'll see what that's going to look like. But I think that it's worth noting that he was very genuine, and he talked a lot about development, and it's something I wanted to get in a lot to, as we move forward in the show in our next segment. Just a little bit of tease right there, where I asked him what kind of experience that he might be able to use on the recruiting trail from his very long stints in the NFL. And he had a really great just talk about, I know what these guys are looking for because I've been in draft rooms. I know what I would look for. And I thought that was really interesting. And that's something that he said, I can bring that and I can sell that to high schoolers. I can sell that to transfer portal guys. I can sell that to guys on the roster right now, that I know what it takes to get you drafted.
Exactly. And also the important thing that he didn't say, but is basically implied when saying all those things, he has the relationships with people in the NFL to say, hey, I've also been there and I know what these guys are looking for. Like the last time he was in the NFL, I believe, was 2018, right? When he was at
2020. He was with the
2020. Right. But with McVay in 2018, I believe, or right? That sounds about right.
Yeah, he was with McVay. He had sense with a whole bunch of those kinds of guys.
Right. So it's like he's obviously it's not like he's just coming from the NFL, but he still has very recently been in the NFL. So he knows the current modern era of quarterbacks. He knows what guys want. And he has those relationships where it's like, I'm not like in the NFL or have like coaches that I have coached alongside that have gotten promoted to the NFL, but having those relationships will be able to convince players like, hey, not only has he seen it, done it, knows what it takes, but he also kind of like Saban, where it's like, hey, I talk to these coaches when the scouts come in and say, hey, who am I looking at here? He's got those experience, those relationships, and even more. Because obviously you're going to have scouts coming through a program like Washington. They come through all the major programs, whether they have relationships or tight relationships with their school or not. But especially for Jedd Fisch, where he can bring in, and we'll talk about it later, a former, potentially NFL head coach and multiple coaches in that regard to say, hey, these are guys that I have relationships with that could be analysts down the road, right? So there's a lot of things that play to where not just being in the NFL with that experience, but then having those relationships, because that also ties back into recruiting, right? Where I know how to develop you to get you to the NFL, and I know who from a high school level can develop from high school to college to the NFL. Now, again, there's always outliers, but I think having a coach that knows that is imperative on the recruiting trail, because just not to harp on DeBoer, but when you're coming from a lower level school, right, NIAA, Sioux Falls, and, Southern Illinois, Eastern Michigan, you kind of have to find those diamonds in the rough and develop.
Even Fresno State to a certain extent.
Exactly. And so having Jedd Fisch with a UCLA background, with multiple NFL stops, coaching at Michigan in the Big Ten, under Jim Harbaugh, right? So he's got all this experience, and then we now look at the record and say, oh, well, maybe isn't that good? Imagine you're just climbing that ladder and you're stacking all that information. The higher you get, the more that information kind of crystallizes. And I think that's where Jedd's at this point in his career. Okay, I kind of like Sark. I've been through this ringer a couple of times as a coach, as an offensive coordinator assistant. Now I know how to run my program. I just need the opportunity, and he's got the perfect one at Washington.
Right. And we've seen him build up Arizona. And I know we talked about it on yesterday's show, where we saw what that looks like in his 3-year process, where he took a 1-win team and turned them into a top 10 contender, where he did a really good job of that. So we know that it's something that can work in the right scenario. And we're going to talk a lot more about that right after a quick break. And we're going to send a message to our friends over at LinkedIn at the start of the new year. Every small business owner is asking themselves the same question. What's the one move I can make that'll take my business to the next level in 2024? LinkedIn Jobs knows that your success all depends on the team you surround yourself with. That's why LinkedIn Jobs has created the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just another job board. LinkedIn has a vast network of more than 1 billion professionals, which makes it the best place to hire. Hiring is easy when you have that many quality candidates. So easy, in fact, that 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. That's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn also knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats and might not have the time or resources to hire. Thankfully, with LinkedIn, the process is intuitive, quick, and easy. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockdowncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockdowncollege. Post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. So, Lars, let's continue talking about this recruiting pitch, because I was really impressed by that answer that Jedd Fisch gave us when he talked about, I know what teams are looking for. I know what these guys are looking for. And then he took it a step further when he was still giving his introductory talk. And one thing that he said was he views high school recruiting as the NFL draft, and he views the transfer portal like free agency. And in this modern age of college football, I really like that comment because that's exactly what it is, right? Despite what some people might think about, I disagree with the transfer portal because of X, Y, and Z reasons. That's fine. I understand that point, but it's just it's gotten to the point where it's, all right, you need to get on board with this because this is the way the world is working. And he did a really good job of it, but also made a really great point of NFL teams are built through the draft. And that's built through guys that you're developing from day one and say, we can build around that. For example, down in Arizona, that was to Tyrone McMillan, where you go out and you get a guy like that. And you were able he was able to sort of build an offense around there, where you get guys like Jonah Morgan, Jonah Coleman, you get Jacob Cowings in there. Dorian Singer was really impressive in his time there. Noah Fafita, obviously, where you have those kinds of guys in there, and then you can patch holes through the transfer portal, where it's like, okay, yeah, we need to bring in a big guy here. And to give a UW example, Jabbar Muhammad, where you can add in an extra guy like that to help. Okay, yeah, we need some help in this room. We'll bring in this kind of guy. And that's a really great way to look at it, where Kalen DeBoer, Courtney Morgan, their strategy was way more, all right, well, we can build through the transfer portal. It's just going to be way more of a year in, year out kind of thing, where I don't know if it's necessarily soon enough to say one is better than the other, but I kind of wanted to talk about why I like the way that Jedd Fisch, what his strategy, where I like the upside of his strategy versus what Kalen DeBoer and Courtney Morgan's was, where I'm not saying that was wrong in any way, but just the fact that, okay, yeah, with the added resources that he talked about, saying, I've got a huge assistant coach salary pool. I know that I have a huge commitment to help with off the field, with NIL, with that sort of stuff, where putting all of those things in place and being able to go out and get guys like, for example, Aaron Butler, right? Where you can go out and get players like that, to Tyrone McMillan, where we can look ahead to the class of 2025 and some guys that, Zadarius Rainey-Sale, getting him back in the boat now after he decided to decommit following the coaching change. Dijon Lee, Phillip Bell, other names that I know you and I had highlighted early on in the process, where, yeah, these are, they were building relationships with the guys at Arizona as well. But now it's a matter of doing it again at Washington, maybe with increased resources, being able to do a better job of that and saying, okay, we can count on these guys for 2, 3, 4 years because we're confident in our ability to coach them up, maybe play some of them early and continue to build and patch holes around guys like that.
Yeah. And I mean, the fact that you mentioned Aaron Butler, what was the third school that was mentioned with him at the end? It was Arizona. So yep. And again, now nobody was really expecting to have to do what Texas ended up doing to get Aaron Butler at the end of the process. But I think kind of Jedd Fisch knows the landscape of college football. He knows the name of the game. He called it free agency. So again, it's not like he's shy about saying what the deal actually is and what the game actually is all about, as unfortunate as that may be, right? So
right.
He's not afraid. He's not, and I think that's the thing that I liked about where he said it, you still want to build and kind of develop, like, what do you want to say, 70, 80% of your roster through high school and through
sure.
And again, that also means now you're targeting the 4 and 5 stars, so they might play earlier. You're signing a couple 3 stars that could develop a la Nick Harris, right? Where maybe they fly under the radar. So you want a mix of them, right? You don't want just 3 stars. You don't want just all these under the radar guys where, because like if you're at a school like Washington, you have the resources, as he mentioned, to go and get the best of the best. Now, the important thing is you still want to add in the portal. And so I think it was good that he acknowledged, like, hey, I can still kind of, patch 1 or 2 holes here. I think that was the key for him, right? It wasn't like, okay, we're losing our quarterback, our top receiver, our top offensive lineman, our top defensive lineman, our top safety. Okay, we need to go find the 5 best players in the portal at those positions. No, we hope that there's at least 3 of those that are covered with, hey, this sophomore who only had 500 yards will be a 1,000-yard receiver next year because of the offense and the system that we have in place. So that's where the development comes into play. Now, again, if you see a certain receiver out there or a certain player and you want to at least put your hat in the name, or, name in the hat, I think that's something that also Jedd Fisch seems like he's willing to do, where it's like, hey,
absolutely,
if we need to go get him, we're at least going to try. Now, will we get him? Maybe not, and we're going to develop our roster accordingly to not rely on those guys. And I think that's kind of the point that he was getting at without explicitly stating it, is we don't want to be in a situation where we're stuck to where we have to go look at the portal for a quarterback or for a player at a key position, unless, like 2 players retire and one has a medical injury, like a medical retirement, right? Where it's like, hey, we didn't foresee this coming into play. But even Jedd still strikes me as a guy who would sign an extra 4-star offensive lineman or 4-star, whatever that is, at that position if he knew that a player might not be able to return because of, medical or whatever the case may be. So he seems like he's aware enough to know how to manage a roster. He's not cocky enough to overstep and overspeak, but he's confident enough to know what he can do without guaranteeing, like, hey, we're going to win championships here, right? Like, I think Kalen DeBoer was like, hey, we're going to win a championship here. It's like, well, hey, he actually almost got pretty close, but Jedd also wants it to be sustainable. And I think that's what, if we're being honest, Kalen didn't do, because the roster coming back next year was like, oof, you really almost do have to go patchwork it with a quarterback, a running back, or a couple of receivers. And you really were kind of cornered in that regard, where Jedd Fisch is trying to avoid that.
So, and that, again, that's the difference right there, where there were reasons why this last high school class for Kalen was a little bit smaller. And those were understandable, but there was still work to do through the portal, whereas we really liked a lot of the acquisitions that were brought in. We're still really high on some guys that have stuck around. Sebastian Valdez. I know BJ Green hasn't signed, but we haven't heard any movement saying he's looking elsewhere or anything like that so far. Jeremiah Hunter being another one, where those were really good acquisitions, and we really like that. And now instead of, having to go, because, and this is something that we'll still probably have to see at some point, is going out to find another 2, maybe even 3 defensive tackles. Whereas, maybe if with under Fisch's strategy, that's not something we'll see going forward, where it's okay. Yeah. I want to sign 3 or 4 defensive linemen every single year and just have an abundance of bodies at that position, with both of us understanding, if you're not playing, if, there are other reasons that might come into play, that the transfer portal is still an option. And being able to just recognize that and just understand what college football has become and what it has turned into, that, there are options here for both sides to explore if something doesn't work out for one reason or another.
Exactly. And I think the key to also remember is, given the timing of when Jedd Fisch is taking over, he still technically can sign 2024 recruits. Right now, there's not a ton of them left. Right. But, when you look at, I think he said the number was 65 players on the roster, give or take, plus or minus a couple. So we're talking 20 guys, right? So you're thinking of that. You're probably thinking, okay, this class would be a majority transfer portal, because you're not going to get 10 and 10. And I don't think Jedd Fisch is about to go sign 15 high school players, right? So I think because now you're kind of almost backloading your roster to where, hey, now we have 15 more incoming freshmen on top of the early enrollees that we already have. Now your roster is almost so tilted the other way, where you don't have as much experience, but you have a lot to build on in 3 years, where Jedd knows he kind of has to win now. So this year this first year, you're going to see more portal. As we go along, it's going to become way more staggered.
Right. No, I agree with that, because, and this is no slight to anybody that might still be out there, where there are going to be more projects than there are win now kind of players that are out there that are unsigned. Whereas you might be able to go find 2, 3, 4 kind of guys from the high school ranks. Whereas we saw Kalen DeBoer come in and sign Armand and Javon Parker late. Where maybe, and Javion Green, who I know just transferred to Stanford, but maybe you find, but he contributed a lot as a true freshman. Where maybe you can go find a couple players like that, but you can utilize the portal a little bit more. And then we'll probably see a bigger high school class in 2025 where, like we said earlier on, he was ready to go out and start recruiting that tomorrow. If need be. So that also just seems like a good sign of where the program is heading, because it feels like you and I have seen for a long time, there are a lot of Husky fans that are out there that are saying, we want a good recruiter. We want not just a good recruiter, but somebody who's going to work hard and work at it consistently and understands the importance. Whereas the talent evaluation aspect of that is very important. And I feel that was something that we saw Kalen's staff do really, really well. Second to none was evaluate talent at a very high level. But it seems like not only can they also do that with this Arizona staff, but at the same point, they aren't afraid to go out and, just compete in any way possible for some of the best recruits in the country. And I feel that that might be a good place we're going to kind of transition here, because the coaching staff is not settled yet, but it seems like Pete Carroll is going to have a role in what's going on here at UW. But first, we got to send a message to our good friends over at FanDuel. The NFL regular season is wrapping up, but there's still time to get in on the action with FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $150 in bonus bets, win or lose. The app is so easy to use. There's so many different ways to bet, like live same-game parlays. You can find bets in the new Explore tab. You can make a parlay in the Parlay Hub. The best way to find popular parlays and more, so visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet a layup. FanDuel is an official partner of the NFL. And before we move on, we also have to send a message to our good friends over at Jase Medical. I know we come to sports to escape from some of the crazy realities of real life, but can we just talk for a minute about preparing for real life? According to the FDA, pharmacies are running out of antibiotics like amoxicillin right in the middle of the worst flu season in over a decade. This is scary. I can't imagine a more helpless feeling than if any of my friends or family got sick while a supply chain issue kept them from life-saving medication they needed. Thankfully, we'll be okay because of Jase Medical. The Jase case is a pack of 5 different antibiotics to treat a long list of bacterial illnesses, which could happen to any of us. Visit jasemedical.com and complete your physician encounter. It will be reviewed by a board-certified physician, and your medications will be dispensed by a licensed pharmacy at a fraction of the regular cost. It's never been more important to be prepared than today. Go to jasemedical.com and use offer code LOCKEDON to get $20 off your order. So, Lars, one of the very many people that Jedd Fisch gave a shout out to during his opening statement was a former boss of his, Pete Carroll, during his time with the Seattle Seahawks. The two worked together. Brendan Carroll obviously is his offensive line coach and offensive coordinator. And one thing that he said was, and he didn't say in what capacity, but is that Pete Carroll will have a role with Washington, whether it be as an advisor and a mentor, whether it be, he didn't necessarily say, but you and I think that there's still a non-zero chance that it could be as defensive coordinator. But there are a whole lot of ways that Pete Carroll could find himself involved in this team. And for a number of reasons, that's really significant.
Right, because I think that's kind of one thing that, especially when we're talking about Jedd Fisch as an offensive coach, we know he's going to get a quarterback. We know he's going to get some receivers, a running back, and some decent offensive linemen. We know that. We saw that in Arizona. We've seen that throughout his career. Much like the last regime, can you also get the other side of the ball to show up more than half the time? And that's not a slight to Chuck Murray, but it just really seemed like, the last couple of years, the defense was certainly kind of doing their part in moments, but not necessarily at a consistent level to where the offense was. Because if you have a top, let's just say 25 defense with a top 10, 5 offense, even top 15 offense, you are really cooking in college football.
That's an elite team.
Whereas, and again, you don't need to be top 5 in both, right? You just need a top 25 defense, above average, but certainly not marginal. And Pete Carroll, in any way, shape, or form, would immediately attract recruits and give gravitas to that defense, who's also going to have some decent defensive coaches. I mean, I saw John Richardson, the Arizona quarterbacks coach, I believe was in the building at Washington at Jedd Fisch's introductory press conference. again, I'm not saying it's confirmed that he's there, but more likely than not, because there was a number of other Arizona coaches that were there, but also some that weren't there that we had also heard would be joining the staff.
Right.
So again, what the role is, we don't know. But as you said, it's pretty clear that Pete Carroll is going to be involved, and that's really all that matters for Jedd. Because if he's just making recruiting calls or doing videos, because Pete Carroll is not going to be brought in to be breaking down film. If anything, he's going to be setting up a scheme on defense and setting up kind of the personnel and being not a figurehead, but kind of being like almost the head coach of the defense, right? Where it's like, hey,
Sure.
you're still having assistant coaches do all the key things and stuff like that. But he's so young in terms of kind of his
heart.
mind, his heart, attitude, all that, to where he can easily still be around college players, right? And they're making money, so he's good with that. So it's like, you don't have to deal with, oh, well, how is an NFL coach going to deal with having to coach kids that make money? You just got 12 plus years in the league coaching millionaires. Like, he's dealt with Russell Wilson. I'm pretty sure he can deal with some 19-year-old redshirt freshman who wants to play more and needs to improve.
Right.
Pete knows how to handle those conversations, and they would be a perfect person for that, right? And it makes everybody else's job on defense easier, right? Where if you're a quarterback's coach, you're a linebacker's coach, you don't have to feel like, oh, I have to carry this recruitment. I can do the inroads. But Pete Carroll, like, hey,
that's a closer right there.
Exactly, and that's all you need, right? Pete doesn't need to be the head coach making the calls, doing all the press conferences, holding court, talking to donors, all that. He can, right? And it'd be great to have that body in the building. But at this point in his career, you don't want him to stretch too thin. So it's obviously a stretch to have me the Washington head coach, but it's no stretch to see him as an assistant in some capacity, especially with Brennan Carroll, his son, and likely maybe even Nate Carroll also joining the staff as well in some role.
So so you're absolutely right. I like every point that you just made, but I want to take it a step further than that, because one other thing that Jedd Fisch mentioned was how important football is to the city of Seattle, and how he saw that under Pete Carroll when he worked with the Seahawks, and how he just understands what the culture of that can be in this city. And he said, I want to make sure that I can do that in every way that I possibly can. And so not only does that, tie into what Pete Carroll meant to the Seahawks for such a long time, but it just brings in everything that, it's the defensive strategy where we saw the Legion of Boom. We saw all that for such a long time. And he talked about the history of Don James. He talked about the history of Chris Peterson and all of those other things. And I feel like it all ties together, because he said, like, one of the many things that he said was, Washington is one of the 12 or 14 places that I believe can compete for a national championship year in and year out. So, and we saw what kind of fan interest this team got with this last year, going 14-0 before you get to the national championship, just being one of the best teams in college football throughout the year, throughout the last 2 years. Really, we saw the interest grow and grow and grow. And I feel like Jedd Fisch understands that that's something he needs to find ways to sustain, and bringing in a guy like Pete Carroll can help with that, to continue to utilize Chris Peterson, who's still in the building, around the team, and just kind of exploring every avenue you possibly can for success. This is a really smart decision to make on that part. And obviously the fact that they have a prior relationship doesn't hurt anything either. So it's not like he's going in blind saying, oh yeah, this is a new guy, I don't know how we're going to mesh. He already has a relationship with him and already knows that this is somebody who he can work with.
Which is just crazy, because not too long ago, Washington had a head coach that had some former NFL experience that you would think you could say the exact same thing about, right? Like, hey, this guy has some NFL ties, he could bring in NFL people, and just went the exact opposite way. Right. Jedd is giving the exact opposite vibes, right? Where it's like, hey, I'm not speaking like, oh, hey, I'm going to have Pete, I'm going to have Bill Belichick, he's not reaching for the stars, right? He's not trying to say, hey, we're going to be like the Hollywood of the West Coast up in Seattle. Sure. But he knows the value of football. And I think that's kind of, in a way, almost Kalen kind of talked about that in a bit, where it's like, there's a special love for football in the city of Seattle, right? There's a certain level of, the Mariners have been what they are. The Sonics aren't here. Kraken are popular, but it's a different kind of niche, right? Football is the sport of the state of Washington. And when both programs are humming, or even when this season showed, the city is willing to get behind the winner, whichever one it is. Absolutely. And it happened to be Washington. So, and Pete saw that firsthand. I mean, they practice over at the VMAC a decent amount. So there's plenty of similarities there. And also, as mentioned on the show a while back, Cam Chancellor was on the sideline against Boise State before the game. these other former Seahawks that are around, Bobby Wagner probably would be a guy to where all these relationships, whether Jedd knows them or not, will be invaluable to him just to have around and to kind of, pick the brain, if you will. Because when you're a head coach, you want to take as much input as you can, but be able to filter through and be like, okay, how can this help me? How can this, maybe how can I avoid doing it this way and things like that. All those relationships are going to be invaluable for Jedd.
No, you're absolutely right. And it all comes back to the being able to bring in guys like Cam Chancellor, maybe Bobby Wagner, Richard Sherman, some of these other guys who Pete Carroll knows and Pete Carroll has a relationship with. And it'll all tie together in a certain sense. And then, because it all comes back to just the grand theme of the show, which is recruiting. And how is the roster going to look over the next couple of years, where if you're a high school recruit and you say, oh, Bobby Wagner's talking to the team, Bobby Wagner's helping those guys out. Wow, that's something I'd want to be a part of. Cam Chancellor's doing that, Richard Sherman, whoever it might be. That's something that you can sell very easily to some of these guys, along with everything else that we've talked about over the course of the show, where there are so many different avenues that can be explored. And it seems like not only does Jedd Fisch seem willing to explore every avenue possible, it seems like just from the way that he spoke to us in the media, that Troy Dannen has given him every possible opportunity to do so, with a salary pool, with whatever the NIL is going to look like, where we've heard a lot of good things about it. Jedd Fisch talked about it in a very positive light, where you have all those things and it all just seems like it's trending in the right direction. Now, obviously, before we can say, yes, this all looks really good, we need to see the fruits of that labor. And I feel like that's a really good point for us to just kind of wrap this one up. Lars, as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you to all the everydayers tuning in. We really do appreciate your support as the show has grown over the first couple of months. It's so awesome to see. We really do appreciate everything from you, the comments, all of that. It means the world to us. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, feel free to leave a comment down on this video. We try to get back to as many of you as possibly can. And please make sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcast, whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We are there. We're everywhere. We're updating this channel with new content every single day. So like I said, make sure you leave a like on the video. Leave us a comment down below if you have any questions, comments, concerns. Leave us a 5-star review if you're audio only. It all really helps the show out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we will talk to you on Thursday.